In this talk, I'm gonna present mostly tooling, but since DevOps is both about, you probably know that already, tooling and culture, so I'm gonna slide into that as well. This is my name. This is me. I'm gonna present the company that I work right now, where I work right now, fast. So I'm the CEO of Social Studios, which is a company that, in simple words, just takes your Facebook feeds and makes a movie, a short television show from it. There's another screenshot right here that you know, this is the actual show. You see my friends at the left, which are the producers and the creators of the show. And this is a really cool app. And right now, I think I'm using a lot of the lessons that I've learned in the past, in previous companies. And this is what I would like to share right now. So this is more or less a personal story of myself, searching for the right tool, searching for the right cultural fit, in two companies. The first is Outbrain, the second is Totango. And my mission was, about 3 years ago, to find a tool, or maybe two tools, that would both be able to deploy applications and maintain infrastructure. Those are probably the main things that DevOps dudes do. By the way, I think at the time, if there was a name for DevOps, I didn't know that. All I knew is that I had a couple of shell scripts that I had to maintain, and it was lousy. You know, it was a lousy job, and it was difficult, and it just didn't scale. I mean, not in the sense of throughput, in the sense of you know, human resources. I just wasn't able to keep up with the pace of that. So deploy applications and maintain infrastructures. That was my goal. About 3 years ago. And then I was confused. I didn't know what should I do, what should I choose, Chef, Puppet, Control Tier, CF Engine, etc. I have to maintain infrastructure, and I also have to deploy my apps. Are those the same things? I mean, if you look at it from 30,000 miles, it's just, you know, installing software, right? You could install a database and you could install a Java application. So this potentially could just be the same problem. So initially, I was looking for a single tool that would maintain infrastructure and deploy applications. And I didn't find it. And I was actually obsessed of finding it. So I tried a whole, you know, list of different tools, some of which are listed here, some of them are actually gone and not listed. And I still didn't find the right tool for me, you know, as a DevOps guy, and I didn't know why. So I was asking myself, why is this so difficult? I mean, just deploying software shouldn't be that hard. I mean, why can't, for example, Chef, or why Control Tier is not able to, you know, to satisfy my goals? Until I finally realized, and this is the main topic of today, until I realized that infrastructure is different from application deployment. So this is the focus for me today. And I'm going to try and answer the question of why are they different, or in what sense they are different, and what do they have in common. So I'm going to jump to the end and then go back. So what did I end up using at the end? So case one, which is Outbrain, ended up with Chef for infrastructure. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Chef here, and Glue for application development. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with how many are familiar with Glue? Okay, so this is a less known tool, but I think it's pretty good. It was developed by, well, mostly by a single person called Jan from LinkedIn. Now he's retired to Hawaii somewhere after LinkedIn's IPO. He was one of the first engineers there. Very good engineer. and he developed Glue to deploy applications at LinkedIn, and eventually it became one of the better tools for doing this kind of job worldwide. So this was case one. Chef was and still is used to deploy the infrastructure itself, of course. So it's since it's a Java-based shop, we use it to deploy Java, Tomcats, databases, users, permissions, etc., etc. You know, the things that Chef is good at. And of course, install Glue. And this is, of course, a required step. Glue is just used to deploy the applications itself. So initially I was thinking, you know, Chef is a pretty strong tool. It's pretty capable of doing a lot of things. Why should I not be using Chef for both? So this is of course a recurring question. And as a matter of fact, I think it is still open. I mean, I have some tentative conclusions, but I do think this is still an open question. So the second case with Tango. So I ended up using Chef again because I knew it and I think it's quite good. Not to say that, you know, its competitors are not as good. I just had previous experience with Chef. And Fabric. How many of you are familiar with Fabric here? Okay, so Fabric is a little more known tool. It's a Python-based deployment application and management tool. It's simple. It's far more simple than Glue. Glue is a pretty capable tool, but it's more complex. Fabric is a lot more simpler. And I think for Tatango, this was the right tool because Tatango is a smaller shop, and perhaps over time, Tatango will move to other tools. But right now, I think Fabric is a good fit. So at Tatango, what does Chef do? I think more or less the same. It provisions databases, Java, Tomcats, set up users, keys, Logstash, Nagios, etc., etc. What does Fabric do? It deploys the applications themselves, the Tomcats, the JDs. It sends notifications, and I think one of the important things that it does, and this I think also applies to the Glue setup at Outbrain, is that it controls very fine-grained process of deployment. And I think this is the key point. So it sends notification, for example, to email, to Yammer, to New Relic, to Boundary, to whatever monitoring and email or communication service that we use. And it tests. It tests the deployment servers, the deployed servers as we go. And I think this is a key point. So isn't it just easy to use a single tool? The answer, of course, is yes. But why? So why am I using more than one? So let's have a closer look at why do I think those are two different problems that require two different tools. But first, let me say that before I delve into that, I think in the general sense, you know what, I'm going to get to that in the conclusion, so let's just skip it. So I'm going to make a brief overview of the tools. I'm going to make it fast because I assume most of you are familiar with them. So Chef is a it's an infrastructure automation tool. It has the concept of recipes, resources, and converges to a desired state. Of course, this is, you know, very, very high level of the tool, description of the tool, but I simply do not have enough time to delve into the details. So I hope you guys are familiar with that. Puppet is similar in concept. It has a few, it has, of course, a different language. It has some of the different concepts, but in general, it does, I think, the same thing, at least to the best of my knowledge. I'm again, more familiar with Chef than with Puppet. CF Engine is also, CF Engine is an old horse. It's been serving for a long time. I do not have extensive, I do not have extensive use of the tool itself, but from what I know, it does more or less of the same. Probably adds a little bit more on the monitoring side. And I know, big shops use it. Universities if I'm not mistaken, also Facebook, but I'm not sure. And I do know that a lot of large shops do use it. Control tier, on the other hand, by the way, how many of you have experience with that tool, control tier? Okay. So this is, on the other hand, it's a command dispatcher. I mean, that's at least the tagline. So it's not actually meant to be managing infrastructure. It's meant to dispatch commands. But if you come to think of it, how do you manage infrastructure? I mean, don't you have to, send commands to remote machines? So are those things not the same thing? I mean, dispatching commands and managing infrastructure. So that was my initial concept, and that's what got me into this discussion. And later, I think, rather than sooner, I realized that although it could be the same, it doesn't necessarily has to be the same, and in some cases, it better not be. So control tier is, in short, just a command dispatcher. Glue is is a command dispatcher, but it's more than that. It has a state. It has monitoring built in. It has the concept of desired state versus diffs versus it has a very complex and I think very useful DSL that you could automate part of the systems. It has very nice, well, not pretty, but useful UI. It has a very nice API. So it's well, maybe in power it's similar to control tier, but I personally think it's more usable. And Fabric, as I mentioned again, is a far more simple tool than the previous two, which are of course Glue and control tier. Fabric is a deployment automation tool written in Python. So you actually write Python scripts. You use the Fabric library, which essentially lets you do remote shell easily. So it's like doing remote shell in parallel to many hosts, but in Python. So you save yourself the trouble of invoking the SSH command, getting the output back, getting the result code, etc., etc. I just make things a lot more simpler in Python, and the same goes for Capistrano in Ruby, in Rubyland. So those are very similar tools. I think personally, Fabric is a little is somewhat simpler to use, but both Fabric and Capistrano are pretty good at that. So they're both kind of automation remote shelling tools. They do not have a server, for example, unlike Glue, unlike Chef, unlike Puppet. They do not have a central repository. They are more or less just libraries, very useful libraries, but libraries. So those are the main tools that I've looked at for automation deployment and infrastructure management. And then I was asking myself, could I use Chef, Puppet, or CF Engine to? So I knew I can use and I should use Chef, Puppet, or CF Engine to maintain infrastructure, but could they also deploy applications? So my conclusion was that yes, they could. They definitely could. You could deploy applications using Chef with an S, the small Chef tool. You could do a lot of things with Knife. You could automate Chef, and I'm sure you could also CF Engine and Puppet, but again, I have more experience with Chef. But it's kind of awkward. It's kind of backwards. It doesn't actually let me have fine-grained control over the process. It doesn't have the same concepts. I mean, Chef does not have the same concepts as Glue has. So although you could do that, and in many cases you might want to do this. I mean, if you have you have to balance between getting to know a set of tools and getting things done. Then for small shops, I think it's the right approach to use just focus on a single tool and use that for the entire automation system, even if it's not the perfect tool for that. But I think for larger shops such as Outbrain, it does make sense to use more than one tool and, get the right tool for the job. So for example, you could use, as I was mentioning, you could use Chef for ad hoc task, and you could build automation around Chef or around Knife, etc. So this is definitely doable. It's not, I think, it's not, a big no-no. It's doable, but I think it's suboptimal. And I'll expand on that later. So the next question is, so I know I can use Glue, Fabric, and Ctrl-T to deploy applications, but could I not, for example, use them to maintain infrastructure? For example, they could, if I want to install a new version of the database in concept, they could just SSH to that machine and run a script that installs the database, right? So both Fabric and Capistrano can do that easily. Why should I not use them to maintain infrastructure? If I want to, add user keys, add, create directories, delete files, install cron jobs, why should I not be using Fabric or Capistrano or Ctrl-T or Glue? They could do that. So the answer to that was, yes, they could, but again, it's awkward. They do not have the same concepts. They do not understand convergence. They cannot easily deploy servers on multiple platforms, such as, Linux, Macs, Windows, etc., which in Chef is quite easy. They do not have the vast, the large community and the large resource of recipes that Chef has to install, whatever, Logstash, MySQL, Graphite, etc. So though this is doable, this is not, I think, to my opinion, is not optimal in that sense. So why is this awkward? So let's see why is deployment automation different from infrastructure management. So I think they're different in few ways. The first is the level of confidence. What is the level of confidence that you have in your own code versus the level of confidence that you have, for example, on Linux or on MySQL or on Cassandra? Well, at least in my opinion, the level of confidence that I have in Linux or MySQL is greater than the level of confidence that I have in my own in-house code. I know the cynicals would disagree, so that's perfectly acceptable, but that is my opinion. And yeah, so for example, widely used tools such as Linux and MySQL are far more, I myself am more confident in them than in-house. The second, I think, category is frequency. How frequent do you deploy new databases versus how frequent do you deploy your own code? So, again, in my experience, the frequency of deploying infrastructure, or, deploying databases or making any kind of infrastructure change is far less than the frequency of deploying your own application. And of course, I'm speaking from the mindset of continuous deployment. I think it's obvious from this context, in which we deploy applications multiple times a day, dozens of times a day. So, naturally, this is far more frequent than deploying a new database. So database usually deploy every couple of months, sometimes years, and applications you deploy dozens a day. So this is the second parameter. The third is, I think, control. How much control do you want to have of the process? And I think this relates very much to the first, which is confidence. So the less confident you are, the more control you want to have. So when deploying applications, I think you want to have very, very fine-grained control of the process of deployment itself. So you want to, for example, control exactly when they happen. Right? So, for example, if you use Chef, at least in the default setting, you do not have exact control of, when does each host perform runs the Chef client. They could run it every half an hour. You could actually invoke them on demand right now, but it does not provide the correct, I think, the useful tools such as, for example, Glue does. You want to, during the process, you want to notify people, you want to send emails, you want to post to Yammer, you want to post to IRC, you want to post to monitoring services. For example, if you're taking down one server, you want to first, of course, stop the monitoring on that server, deploy the new application, test it, and then continue monitoring. You do not want to have false alarms during application deployment because it happens dozen times a day, and at the end you're going to lose confidence in your monitoring systems unless you do so. And you want to do that as you progress. I mean, it's not just a one-time thing. I mean, suppose you have a couple of hundred servers to deploy, like we did at Outbrain. This is not just a single shot of deployment. It's a gradual process, and you want to have fine control of that. And you want to notify of the progress as it goes. It could end up in just a couple of minutes process, but it could also be 30 minutes or something like that. So you wanna be able to monitor that progress and stop it if you have to, roll back if you have to, maybe make it faster if you think it should. So to mention that, you want to have gradual deployments. So this is also a concept that is very familiar to, I think, tools such as Glue, and you could easily code that in Fabric. It's less, I think, familiar to tools such as Puppet or Chef. Although you could code it to them, of course, they have an API, so you could do this, but the concept itself is less familiar to them, so I think it would be harder to do that. So you want to have gradual and controlled, and of course, cautious deployments, and this goes under control as well. And of course, test as you go. How many of you guys are familiar with the concept of self-tests, running, asking a server to test itself? So this is basically what it means, that after you deploy a server, you tell it, go and test yourself. Tell me if you're okay. Tell me if you're willing to accept traffic. Tell me if you're willing to, read from your queue and process data. The process needs to check whether it has, for example, enough memory to operate. It has the database connection. It has, any kind of backend service that it might need to be using. And, in short, it just needs to know that it's ready for operation. And I think many of the tests the process can do on itself. So you do not need to have an external tool that does that. And it's very convenient in times to ask the process to test itself. So this is also, one of the things that make deployment automation different from infrastructure maintenance, because the concept of self-test is something that you code in your own application. You do not code it usually you cannot code that in third-party applications. Of course, you could, many of them are open source, so you could, but it's a different level of effort. Perhaps rollback if you need to. So the next category, the next kind of change is heterogeneous versus homogeneous environments. So from my experience, infrastructure is usually deployed on heterogeneous environments. For example, you could install MySQL on Ubuntu, CentOS, Windows, Macs, etc. Chef makes that very easy for you. And I think this is not the case with applications. Usually you write applications in single, maybe multiple languages, but you're very much in control of the environment. So if you deploy Java, you know exactly which JDK version you're gonna have. If you deploy Ruby, you know exactly which Ruby interpreter you're gonna be using, and you don't care that much about multiple environments. At least in the kind of shops that I worked at. So I think infrastructure is very heterogeneous versus applications which are very homogeneous. Whose code is this? Is this your code or this is someone else's code? I think this is something I mentioned. If this is your code, you can instrument it. You could bake in health checks or self-tests. and deployment hooks. For example, accept 20% of the traffic, accept 50% of the traffic, accept 100%, etc. And if it's not your code, you just have less control, and you just hope to be lucky. I mean, you deploy a new database version. The best you could do in some cases, you just pray to the gods of Linux and hope for the best. Right, so let's just compare, we're going to wrap up soon. Let's just compare two tools and see where they stand out and where I think they're not the right tool. So, for example, Chef and Glue. So Chef stands out in recipes that it has, a huge community of recipes for almost anything. And as a matter of fact, if I need to install a new service on my servers, it's easier to do that with Chef than, to Google how to install it, or go to the homepage of that. For example, last couple of weeks ago, I had to install Graphite. It's just so much easier to do that with Chef than just going to the Graphite homepage and learning about that. But the thing is that if this is your code, you don't have recipes for that. You just wrote it. There's no community that supports you. So Chef loses that that head start. Chef is very good with homogeneous, the heterogeneous environments, but if it's your code, you just don't need this because you control the environment. Chef is very good running unattended, but again, if this is your code, if you're deploying your applications, you want to attend it, you want to monitor it, you want to know what's happening exactly at the time that you plan. So where does Glue stand out? Glue has fine control over the deployment process, and I hope later you guys would get yourself familiar with that tool, because I think it's a pretty good tool. It doesn't have a pretty interface, but I think it's very useful. But if you're deploying packaged code, such as database servers, you don't need that so much. It has status updates and monitoring, etc. But again, if you're updating the infrastructure, in many cases, if you want to install a new version of the database, you just shift traffic to the other database, install a new version, and, shift traffic back. You don't have to have that close process of monitoring as you go. Unlike applications, you cannot just, stop traffic to your site, install a new version, and get traffic back. It simply doesn't work, right? High frequency model changes. Chef is very good at that, and it uses Zookeeper to sync up all the nodes, and it's very optimized for that. And it's just with infrastructure, you just don't have that kind of high frequency changes. So to summarize that, if you compare the tools, again, this is not a comprehensive list of tools, of course. It's just a short list of tools that I've looked at, and even not all of them. So you could, and you should, I think, use Chef or Puppet to maintain infrastructure. You could, in some ways, use Chef. To the best of my knowledge, I haven't done that, but I know people do. I think with success. You could use Chef for deployment automation. I think this is suboptimal, but I'm happy if you disagree. I do not know anything from Puppet that could be used for that. I could be wrong. Glue isn't that great for maintaining infrastructure. It's very good for deployment automation, especially for large scale operations. Fabric could be used to maintain infrastructure if it's a small set of servers. I think that's definitely doable. And it's very good for deployments. It's not as strong as Glue, but it's simpler. It's much simpler. So to sum up, what I've usually been using, Chef for infrastructure, Glue, Fabric, Capistrano for application. Yes, it is more tools, but, use the right tool for the job. And I'll just end with that. And I think there is a big question mark about the future, and I'm not sure what actually lies ahead. Concepts such as immutable servers or Phoenix servers versus how many of you are familiar with the concept of immutable servers? So in short, immutable servers means that every time you deploy a new version of the application, you just install the server from scratch. you do not install on a hot server. You just, if you're using any kind of cloud provider, that's easy. You just bootstrap a new image, you bootstrap a new server, and install everything it needs, and there you go. You have a new application. You do not install in place. That's the concept of immutable servers. So I think it changes the game a lot, and tools such as Palette support that kind of workflow. So I think the concept of immutable servers is going to bring new spirit to that field of application versus deployment automation. So I think with that I am done, just on time, almost on time. Okay.